Exigence and Purpose. Be sure to pause and rewind the video at any time to take notes and reflect. As we studied in the last video, persuasion doesn't exist in a vacuum. It arises instead from a perceived need on the part of the author. The author experiences something or observes something which inspires them to seek some kind of change. This concept is known as exigence, sometimes called exigency. Exigence is whatever circumstance inspired or otherwise prompted the author to persuade. It is related to the rhetorical situation, but not one of the four elements. Exigence can be a specific event, a series of events, or merely conditions the author finds unacceptable. Exigence can be something the author has experienced firsthand or something they have observed from without. Think back to Fred Rogers' testimony before the United States Senate. What was his exigence? What inspired Fred Rogers to deliver his persuasive testimony? Well, the United States Senate was planning to cut the budget for PBS in half, which meant that the budget for his show would be cut as well. It was also a time of recession, and the United States Senate was tasked with reducing federal spending across the board. In this particular case, the author's exigence is a specific event. What about Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech? What was his exigence? What inspired or prompted Martin Luther King Jr. to deliver this speech? Well, during this time period, racial prejudice against Black Americans was rampant. There were even a number of racist laws that made Black Americans second-class citizens. Added to this, Black Americans experienced racially motivated violence, and many feared for their lives and their communities. In this case, there wasn't any one specific event that inspired the author. Martin Luther King Jr.'s exigence was all the racially prejudicial circumstances that he experienced and observed in the United States at that time. Persuasion is created in order to change the minds and actions of others. The specific change the speaker seeks is known as the purpose of the text. The purpose of a persuasive text can be to convince an audience to think a certain way, to behave a certain way, or to take some specific action. What was the purpose of Fred Rogers' testimony? What was he trying to achieve through his persuasion? Well, ultimately, Rogers wanted to convince his audience to not cut PBS's budget in half, as they had planned to do. You may interpret other minor purposes based on what he says, such as trying to legitimize children's television as a way of helping children develop mentally or emotionally, but his primary purpose is to keep his budget intact. What about Martin Luther King Jr.? What was his purpose? What was he trying to achieve with his speech? His purpose is less specific than Fred Rogers and perhaps less easy to pin down. He wanted, first of all, to generate support for Black Americans and their struggle for civil rights, a movement he was a prominent leader of. But he also wanted to inspire Black Americans across the country who had lost hope. He also wanted to just create a general empathy for Black people, mainly among white Americans, who were either consciously or subconsciously prejudiced. Exigence and purpose are closely related but distinct concepts. Exigence causes an author to create or utter the persuasive text, while purpose is what the author seeks to achieve with the text. You can perhaps look at purpose as a response to the exigence. That's the end of this lesson. Now move on to complete the corresponding assignment.